welcome back to Book and Page. We're on to chapter 10 of The Hobbit. A warm welcome! Oh, isn't that nice? After all of this has gone horribly wrong, we're finally warmly welcomed somewhere. It's not like this isn't temporary. As always, on to the summary. Okay, so Bilbo rides the barrels into the Long Lake, and for the first opportunity, sees the Lonely Mountain, which he doesn't like, and also Lake Town coming up. Turns out the river was actually the only safe path they could have taken. Whoops. Bilbo's luck working out again. So once the elves leave and head into Lake Town for the night, Bilbo pulls the first dwarf out, which happens to be Thorin. When Thorin grumbles too much, Bilbo sort of forgets himself and goes sass master again and tells Thorin to get up and help him. They pull several more dwarves out, including Fili and Kili, who are doing relatively well, and the four of them all together find the rest of the dwarves, most of whom are not in good shape. So they lay all the dwarves out on the shore, and then Thorin, Fili, Kili, and Bilbo all head over to Lake Town to get some help. And approaching the guards, who are not really guarding anything, Thorin comes in, announces who he is, and demands they be brought to the master of Lake Town, which happens pretty quickly, because everyone's like, oh my god, it's King Under the Mountain. Gold! So the people believe that he is in fact the King Under the Mountain, so much more than the Master and the Elves do, that they promptly start singing, as always, and that is enough to press the Master into accepting the dwarves there. So the rest of the dwarves are brought in, they're all fed and doctored and happy, and they stay there for like 2 weeks. Yay! And then Thorin decides this is a better time to get some help while they're still accepted and wanted, rather than waiting too long to the point where everybody's like, get out, and decides time to go to the mountain. And the only one that's not happy about that development is Bilbo. So, yeah. So we have a bit of a resting point. We just had to get there first, and the dwarves are a little more beaten up. Poor Bilbo has a very bad cold. So, the opening of this chapter is actually really interesting because we get another description of where we are, which is pretty normal. Same thing happened with Mirkwood, same thing happened with Rivendell, but this landscape is coming after all of those. So Bilbo gets his first look at the Lonely Mountain, and he's not awed like he was with the Misty Mountains. When he saw the first Misty Mountains, he was like, oh my god, Balin, is that it, Balin? And Balin was like, nope, that's just the tail end of the Misty Mountains, because it's the first mountain Bilbo had ever seen, so he was awed. Too much has happened since that point for him, for Bilbo, I mean, to be sitting in this moment going, if anything, he's stunned because it's not a good thing. Like, it's a foreboding moment, because the Lonely Mountain's coming out of the mist and out of the swamps, and it's imposing and solitary. It's foreboding, because Bilbo knows, like, if this was the closest he was going to get to it, maybe he'd be more awed. He knows he's going to have to go right up to it. He knows he's going to have to go inside of it, and he understands his stories well enough that he's relatively sure he's going to meet a dragon. Like, he's not like, dragons aren't real. He seems to recognize, there's a dragon in that mountain. Yay! And the same thing is true of, like, even Long Lake and Lake Town. This city on a lake in the shadow of this mountain that has a dragon in it. Like, this is like the weirdest place for poor Bilbo to be. We know that hobbits prefer living in sunny places under rolling hills with green grass and good trees and cultivated gardens, and he's literally standing yet again repeatedly we're seeing him standing at the cusp of his understanding about what the wilderness can be. And he's gotten beaten up so many times by this that he's losing that, like, wonder aspect at it, and he's just automatically going for the, like, oh, how is this place gonna kill me? So he doesn't really want to be there. Also, it's probably useful to know that, well, hobbits aren't super great at swimming, and poor Bilbo has been wet and cold and half-drowned most of this trip. So coming into a lake and being like, great, perfect, excellent. Yeah, this is exactly where he wants to be. It's not. Even the concept of the town coming up and being able to go in and have a good bed and good food isn't super interesting to him. In fact, throughout the narrative, we actually lose Bilbo at that point. It focuses more on the dwarves, and even more so on the men of Lake Town and their reaction to the dwarves. We don't get Bilbo really coming back in until bits and pieces. He had a cold. He wasn't enjoying himself. He could just say, thank you very much. And then at the very end where he's saying, and the one person that wasn't happy about all this was Bilbo. He's not a place to enjoy all of these things or be impressed by them. He knows that they have dangers, and this is like the last place he ever expected to see himself. At the foot of the Lonely Mountain, in a gigantic lake, at a town that exists on the lake, with the dragon in the mountain. So, I mean, this is as far as any Hobbit's gone for a very long time. Bilbo's not super happy there, especially since the description actually is haunted entirely by the rotting piles of Dale that are mentioned right at the end of describing the Lonely Mountain and Lake Town. You can see the destruction, what is left of Dale on the hill. Great, perfect, yeah, no. So, Bilbo doesn't really want to be here. And as interesting as this description is, even the readers are supposed to be like, this isn't a good place to be. And interestingly enough, once we actually get into Lake Town and meet some of the people there, we've got this odd little thing where history and memory forgets, but myth and music remember. So we actually have this moment, and again I'll flipper-dipper to it, where they're just coming up, but men remembered little of all that. This is the description of that Dale was once beautiful and it's now a rotting pile. But men remember little of all that, though some still sang old songs of the dwarf kings of the mountain, Thror and Thrain of the race of Durin, and of the coming of the dragon and the fall of the lords of Dale. So even when people with their histories are forgetting things, there are people who are retaining the songs, and the music remembers even when history is tending to forget this. And in fact, when the dwarves come in, it is the music that allows them to find a place in Lake Town, and have the people accept them. Because the Master doesn't believe that Thorin is who he claims to be, and in fact the rafting elves are saying the same thing, like, he's no one important, he's an escaped prisoner. It is the people as a whole who start singing the song about the king under the mountain that makes the Master have to back off, or he's facing a riot. And that's displayed through their art, it's displayed through their music. And that's an interesting thing. It's not a democracy where we're all going to take a vote, but they're going to raise their voices as one in song, though Tolkien admits there was a whole lot of shouting involved there too. But it was loud enough that, in fact, the elves back off, which is something significant. But there's an ugly side to this music as well. There's a sharp edge to it. The songs that they sing, including the one that were presented, are prosperity in a very material way. It's not about just the communities thriving independent of treasure. They're thriving because of the treasure. And the treasure is the key point there, silver and gold being involved. And in fact, we get the one song about the mountain thriving, and then we're told that the people started singing about Lake Town thriving off of this. And this is off-putting to the dwarves. I mentioned last time about how greed doesn't like greed. The dwarves are known to be greedy, but that's because they want the gold from themselves. The moment the men start singing about their ownership of the gold, well, then that's off-putting, because the dwarves don't want the lake town to have that much gold. Majority of it is the dwarves, and in their kindness and goodness, they might share that wealth. But the fact that the lake town is willing to sing about it, that's not kosher to the dwarves. Part of that is, again, the dwarves are willing to risk their lives, but we're also seeing a deep greed here, deep-seated greed in practically everybody. The Master's certainly noted as having a head much less for song and more for trade deals. And we saw that again with the Wood King as well. So we're seeing a lot of greed that is palpable in this area. And greedy people don't like other greedy people. So even the music, even the songs, it's got that edge where we're going to start disliking each other and fighting over all of this. And it's hard because one of the arguments that Thorin makes is that he has family rights to the mountain. It is his line. He is Thorin, son of Thrain, son of Thror, of the line of Durin. It's a very deep-seated line from some of their oldest heroes and kings, and more recent heroes and kings who ruled the mountain. So Thorin's claim is through this pedigree that he mentions, that right away, the moment he walks in to Lake Town, he says, I am Thorin, son of Thrain, son of Thor, of the line of Durin, and I want to speak to the master of this town. And he might be a little bedraggled, but Bilbo says he looked it. He had this dark look in his eyes, and the gold at his neck and at his waist. In that moment, he looked like the king of the mountain. And has continued to, he repeats that pedigree. He's bringing up this family line several times. But it's not being respected from the higher-ups. It's not believed by the Master of Lake Town, or necessarily the Wood King. It's the common people that are seeing and respecting this high pedigree. And that's a little weird. It's a question of how much they've been trained to respect this pedigree, which says that these people are higher up, and those who don't have that pedigree are naturally lower down. And they're sort of precipitating this. Except that's sort of problematic, because rather than their master of the Lake Town being one of these high pedigrees, we actually see a captain of the archers. Might be captain of the guard, but might just be a certain archery group. But Bard, who we'll get by name later, is a descendant of the ruler of Dale. And he's respected from his actions and his bravery. He is not respected and given high positions due to his pedigree, his own pedigree. Their own people are sort of set aside, but the dwarves are held to this pedigree standard, which is a little weird when you look at it. But the dwarves are probably lucky for it, because the master might have just handed them back to the elves if he didn't have all of these people who really respected Thorin's pedigree. But maybe that's really, he knew the elves were there, so he knew he had to come out swinging with this pedigree standard. It should also be mentioned briefly that we actually finally get Thorin revealing that Fili and Kili are his nephews. He defines them specifically as the sons of his father's daughter, which means that it's his sister's sons. And historically, this has actually been one of the closest male family relationships, especially if one of the men involved is a king, because that's the line you actually know is your bloodline. And why I say this is, again, every mother knows that a child that she bore is her own child because she bore it. Fathers don't have that connectiveness. I mean, you could trust your wife and say, yes, I know that my wife's child is my own, or you can come from a culture that it doesn't matter who the father is, but your wife's children, no matter who the father is, are your children. But a lot of Western society, that's not true. So you can't always trust that the children your wife bore are your own. They're hers. Can't guarantee they're yours. But any children your sister has are guaranteed to have the same bloodline as you because they're guaranteed to be hers. So you're more likely to be able to trust your nephews as a direct bloodline than necessarily your sons, which is why we get a lot of prosperous relationships between uncle and nephew, and less so between father and son. Father and son tend to destroy each other. Nephews tend to help out more. Roland from the Song of Roland is Charlemagne's nephew, and Arthur's most enduring knight throughout all his tales is Gawain, who's also his nephew. And in fact, again, that bloodline issue in Legends is always wrought. Mordred, as Arthur's son, destroys him, but Gawain, as his nephew, is always by his side. So it's sort of interesting that we get this bloodline again further down. It's not just Thorin, son of Thrain, son of Thor of the line of Durin. It's also Fili and Kili, sister sons of Thorin, son of Thrain, son of Thor, of the line of Durin. So there's also, again, that lineage there that is specifically mentioned in this chapter. So pedigree becomes important, music remembers things, and Bilbo doesn't want to be here. I almost said none of us want to be here. No, practically everybody else wants to be here because everyone else wants gold. Bilbo just wants to go home. Soon, Bilbo, but it's going to get a lot worse before it gets better. So I'm going to keep reading, and I hope you do too. Let's head on into the mountain, and I'll see you next time.